Who is the Speaker of the House? What is his or her job? And how do they get elected? We're going to talk about that right after this.
Hi, folks. Thanks for tuning in. Here's your host, Representative Rick Crawford.
And we're back. Thank you for joining us for Tune In. We've had a lot of phone calls, as you can imagine, about the Speaker of the House, and this has been going on, I guess, for about a couple of months now, ever since the motion to vacate the chair back in July. So, as Speaker Boehner resigned last month, obviously it's been our task to elect a new speaker. As I said, our office has received a lot of phone calls and letters on the subject. So I want to talk about that today and really kind of try to give you a little insight into what the process is. And you're going to hear me use that term a lot, process. That's critical. And we'll get to that in just a minute. But first, let's talk about how the office of Speaker was established. Going back to Article 1, Section 2 of the U.S. Constitution in 1789, the Speaker is charged with overseeing, maintaining, and enforcing the House rules. But not everybody knows this. The House Speaker does not have to be an elected representative. So you could nominate and elect anybody to serve as Speaker of the House. It doesn't have to be a sitting member of Congress. A lot of people don't know that. Interesting part of the rules. The Constitution states that each House creates its own rules for governing. That's important to note. We have a completely different set of rules in the House than they have over in the Senate. I have a better handle on House rules and understanding of how they work by far. Most people, even in the Senate, don't know how the Senate rules work, and that's a comment, a subject for another day. That is a very convoluted set of rules over there that I wouldn't even attempt to try to understand. But the idea is the House is the people's house. And in order for the people's voice to be heard, and for us to engage on their behalf and really honestly represent people and let the best ideas come forward, that's, it requires compromise occasionally. And really what we are trying to achieve is the greatest good for the most people. That's what we're supposed to do. And so we set the rules of the House, and that's prescribed in the Constitution. But what we're hearing a lot about right now, we've been getting calls from folks at home. We hear a lot of members, a lot of talking heads on TV that say regular order. We want to return to regular order. But very few people really know what that means. And in fact, regular order, you can look through the Constitution and you will not see the term regular order anywhere, because regular order exists to me. I'm going to give you my definition of what I believe regular order is. And every camp within our conference has a different view of what regular order is. So, a return to regular order isn't as simple as it might seem. But so how do we achieve it? And since we write our own rule book, regular order, again, as I said, is sort of on subject to a lot of subjective interpretation. But to me, it's one thing. It's respect for the process, the House process that we prescribe in our rules package, which is given to us by the Constitution. As long as we have a speaker that respects that process, then the House can work its will and its way. And that is a better reflection of what folks at home want. It's a better reflection at a given time of the people's will. That's what that's what separates the House from the Senate. That's why we run every 2 years as opposed to every 6 years, because we are the people's house. We're the closer link to the people than what the Senate is. And again, I'm not trying to be disrespectful to the Senate. They have their role, we have ours. Ours is to work very closely to our constituents, which is why we are elected every 2 years. And so I think that what we need to do is develop a very healthy respect for the process that returns the authority back to the people's house. Let me give you an example of that. Regular order, had we been following regular order, as I believe simply stated is a respect for the process, you recall a few weeks back I did an episode on TuneIn about why I voted against the continuing resolution. And it's because the continuing resolution, or the CR as we call it, robs elected representatives of our constitutional authority to represent you and our spending priorities and your spending priorities through the appropriations process. When we do that, we're basically ceding that authority to the president, to the executive branch. That's our job in the legislative branch to do that. And when we do a CR, a continuing resolution, it's just as the name implies, it's a continuation of that funding, and we're kicking it down the street, down to Pennsylvania Avenue, 1600, and saying, you handle it, and you be the one that makes the spending priorities. And that's not a good way for us to represent you and what you believe. An omnibus spending bill, again, is another example of us not doing our job, and it makes it impossible for us to accurately represent our constituents. It's not just me and Arkansas 1. It's everybody. Everyone has ideally the same number of constituents, roughly 700 to 750,000 constituents. Some a little more, some a little less, depending on how it's apportioned out. But bottom line is there are 435 of us here in the House, and we all have the same job, and that's to represent you. And if we abandon that appropriations process, we're basically abandoning a respect for the process and how we represent you. And so, again, I voted against the Cromnibus for that reason. That's why I voted against the CR. So we start with this respect for the process gets us back into a system where we start to do our appropriations. And if and when we do that, I think what you'll see is that the process works as it's supposed to. Which brings me to this next point. If we choose process over personalities, I think that's important. What we get sort of wrapped up in is this cult of personality. Those are people that we see a lot on TV that we're familiar with, and they might have some great presence on camera, any number of things that make you go, oh yeah, that's the man for the job or the woman for the job. That's not necessarily what we need to. The Founding Fathers really left us the ability to not put our faith in a person. Let me tell you this. I don't feel like I'm that old. I'll be 50 in January. Letting you in on a little secret there. But in that time, what I have learned about people is that if you put your faith in a person, be prepared for disappointment, because we are given to, make mistakes. That's what we are as people. As a person, we tend to make mistakes. And if you get so wrapped up in faith in a person, you're going to be disappointed. But if you look at what the Founding Fathers did, and this is why I think our Constitution is such a great governing document, and it has stood the test of time, is that the process works when we follow it, when it is implemented as designed. So let's retool our thought process back to less faith in people, more faith in the process, and get out of this personality contest about who would be the best speaker. Instead of demanding a certain speaker based on a set of beliefs or a litmus test, which I don't think there ought to be a litmus test for Republicans, because every Republican represents their own district, and every district is different. So I think it's important that we understand and have a respect for that. But again, let's not look at an individual. The litmus test, if there was one, would be, what's your stance on respecting the process that's set forth in the Constitution on how we implement rules and govern ourselves in the legislative process. And so if we follow it, the best ideas come to the top. The legislation that our conservative majority puts forth will win. And that has no regard for the speaker's personal agenda or his personality. It's about what we do in choosing the right process. So that brings us back to elections. Well, who are you going to support for speaker? Well, let me pull the curtain back a little further. This is not as simple as going to the floor and casting your vote for speaker. As a conference, we go through the machinations of an election. There are 247 members of the Republican conference. The majority, makes that designation on speaker in most cases. We'll go through the nominating process. Right now, there are 2, maybe 3 candidates that are in the running. Obviously, Paul Ryan, Daniel Webster is one. And there may be some more that emerge, I don't know, between now and next week when the election is scheduled. And so we've talked about regular order. Daniel Webster has talked about it. Paul Ryan's talked about it. The ones who were in the race before and dropped out, they've all talked about a return to regular order, and we may still hear more about that. But because it means different things to different people, what we have to do is try to find the person who has the better dedication and respect for the process. In the end, that's what matters. The speaker is a little bit of a misnomer. It's not about speaking all the time. It's about running the House. The speaker is not necessarily an individual who has the best on-camera presence or any of the personality stuff that I mentioned before. It's about running the House in a manner that's respective of the process. And so we need to make the country better, so we need to get back to a more healthy respect of the process that's set forth in the Constitution. We're going to be updating you as this unfolds. Obviously, it's a difficult thing. This may be one of the most difficult things that I have to do as your representative is but in the end, what the conference does is we make a nomination for speaker. And I don't know that it does us any good as individuals, and I don't know that it does me any good as your representative once this is settled in conference to come to the floor and make a show of voting for an individual that didn't win fair and square as our nominee. This is how we ended up, quite frankly. I don't want this to become a political message, because it's not, but it's like if you don't vote, that's essentially a yes vote for the other person. If you do a write-in, very seldom are write-ins ever successful. There's a reason for that. So I mean, if this is our nominee, whoever it might be, then I think it's important that as a group we move forward and support our nominee. We'll see what happens on the floor. That'll happen next week. Until then, I want to thank you for tuning in, and I want to let you know how you can be a part of it. First, subscribe to our YouTube channel and make sure you're sharing Tune In with your friends over email or on Facebook. We put Tune In in our newsletters, and so you can see it that way. And if you'd like to weigh in, we certainly encourage that. Tweet your comments or your questions to TuneInAR1 at TuneInAR1. Again, we'll be keeping you updated as this unfolds. And for now, that's it. And thank you for tuning in. Appreciate it.